Well, first of all, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the International Conference for 2020.
皆さんおはようございます。私も司会を今日一日司会者として参加いたします。大山と申します。国際研究集会へようこそ。
Thank you, Mayo. My name is Daniel Pearce, also one of the overseers for today. And our first speaker this morning, who hardly needs any introduction, is Professor Danièle MOORE. Danielle is currently Distinguished Professor in the Faculty of Education, Simon Fraser University in Canada, and is also Research Director at Université Sorbonne Nouvelle, Paris 3, France.
French.
Thank you.
今日の一人目の発表者はですね、もうほとんど紹介の必要もないかもしれませんけれども、ダニエル・モーア先生です。で、ダニエル先生は今、カナダのサイモン・フレイザー大学の教育学部の卓越教授という、資格で働いておられて、パリ第三大学の方でも研究指導者として勤務しておられます。
Okay, and Danielle is one of the founding researchers in plurilingualism, plurilingual and pluricultural competence, and is also co-author of several key documents for the Council of Europe. And she has continued her work on plurilingualism in an incredibly diverse range of contexts and countries, including collaborative work with museums and schools. And her work has recently led to her receiving a knighthood from the French Republic for her contributions to education and culture.
なぜ紹介に必要がなかったかというと、ダニエル先生は複言語、複文化能力というですね、非常に複言語主義にとって重要な概念の創設者というか、概念を発展させた、開発し、生み出し、また発展させた人の一人であって、また欧州評議会のCEFRですね、欧州共通参照枠のために大きく貢献されました。で、ダニエル先生はそれからずっと20年以上にわたって様々な研究をしてこられて、特に最近では博物館ではですとのコラボレーションであったりとか、もちろん学校の教員、そしてなどなどとの様々な文脈で数多くの実践者と協力しながら、共同しながら複言語教育分野を発展させてこられました。そして今年度はその成果がフランス政府にも認められて、教育功労賞と言われる賞を受賞されまして、現在ナイトの称号をお持ちです。
And so I have had the pleasure of getting to know Danielle during her recent stay as a distinguished visiting professor at Kyoto University. And during the time she was here, alongside Mayo Oyama, we began ongoing collaboration with several elementary school teachers on plurilingual and STEAM education, some of which she will be talking about in her presentation today.
でダニエル先生は実は今年2月から西山先生によって京都大学に招聘教員として赴任されまして、その時に今司会をされているダニエル・ピアースさんと私大山と一緒にまた他の、今日もいらっしゃっているんですけれども、小学校の教員の先生方の協力を得て、日本における複言語教育と、そしてまた日本だけではなくて、一般より、普遍的な、複言語教育理論について、また分野横断的な STEAM 教育についても、共同研究を開始しまして、今も続いています。で、本日の講演ではその研究のいくつかに触れていただけるかと思います。
Okay, and just before I ask you to begin, Danielle, I have a brief message to the audience. Today we're welcoming questions in both English and Japanese. Although due to technical restraints, we ask that you please post questions using the chat function of Zoom. At the end of the talk, our discussant, Professor Junko KIYOTA of Ritsumeikan University, will first pose some questions of her own to Danielle before selecting some questions from the chat. I don't think we will be able to take up all of them.
はい、まもなく講演が始まるんですけれども、参加者の皆さんに案内があります。最後に20分程度の質疑応答の時間があって、まずは指定討論者をしていただく立命館大学教授の清田純子先生に質問をお願いしています。参加者からも質問を受け付けてまして、そちらは、そうですね、日本語、英語、フランス語でももちろん受け付けるんですけれども、技術的な関係で直接声を出していただくことができないので、Zoom のチャット機能ですね、を使って質問やコメントをいただければと思います。全部は採用できないかもしれませんけれども、とてもコメントなどもいただけると喜ばれるかと思います。
Okay, so a short message to Danielle just before I ask you to begin. I know writing with you has been a pleasure. But I also know writing with you, it's very difficult to keep within word limits. Today, though, we have about 1 hour for your talk. And
yes, we'll try to keep within the time limit. We'll try. You'll keep a check on me.
I will send you a chat about when you have about 10 minutes left, and if you don't notice it, I'll wave my hand.
Yes, maybe you can wave because I may not see it. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. So Danielle, it's been an honor to introduce you and to work with you this year. And so I'm very excited for your talk today.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with everybody. And I would first want to thank so much Noriyuki Nishiyama sensei because he invited me to Japan again. And I had the pleasure to be able to spend 5 months. Not that it was planned like that initially, but things were like the pandemic forced me to stay, and I was so thankful for that. And it was a wonderful, wonderful stay. So I'd like to thank him for his invitation as a visiting scholar in the spring of 2020 for those 5 months in Japan, which allowed me to work with amazing students and colleagues and spend time in classrooms, notably with Yuki Sensei and Kana Sensei, who I really want to thank a lot again, and their students as well, to welcome me in their classrooms. And of course, to my colleagues, Mayo, OYAMA, and then Pearce, who've been absolutely amazing as well. And I would like to also to thank Professor KIYOTA Sensei, who's going to play my discussant today. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Is it working?
It's working brilliantly.
Perfect. So I'll try to make you a bit smaller. Okay, so my talk today, well, this morning for you, tonight for me. You probably see that it's already very late for me. It's getting dark. Well, it's not very late, but it's getting dark. So my talk today with you that I wanted to share is called Intersecting Plurilingual Pedagogies with CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning, and STEAM, which stands for science, technology, art, math, and literacies. So I put it together, and it gives pastel, which is a word on the word in French, because it's a form of art. So it's plurilingualism, art, science, technologies, and literacies. And the whole idea of intersecting those threads is to connect educators across contexts, families, and communities. So CLIL, STEAM, and plurilingual education. You're going to have other conferences by Petra Darrier-Hansen and Marisa Cavalli, who I really love, both of them. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to listen to them because it might be just right in the middle of the night for me. But they will come back to those ideas of plurilingual education and CLIL, Emile in French. But my take on those educational threads is around STEAM. And the whole idea of the presentation is to show how we can try to merge those three educational threads, because they share a number of commonalities and they fit our vision of education around plurilingualism. And so I'm going to try to show you this and show how much it is interdisciplinary, and showing you how it encourages disciplinary and language teachers to design collaborative scenarios to teach content knowledge through the use of Japanese and or English and other languages as well. And so opening to multiple languages and multiple perspectives on knowledge. So PASTEL, plurilingualism, art, sciences, technologies, and literacies. So the outline of my presentation today is I'm going to share with you 4 key principles that I think are the most important, as I think myself, to describe those PASTEL approaches, those plurilingual pedagogies within arts and sciences, and to develop literacies. Then we are going to move on to 5 key elements, move on to 2 very important ideas that are cross-cutting concepts and learning objects. And then we are going to see why they are helping to contextualize learning to support awareness and also perspective taking. And then the 5th part will be to see how it can be all put together, weaving languages and disciplinary knowledge in Japan. So we'll move on to elementary schools in Japan, but this is something that we can do as well in other contexts. I mean, not only elementary, but secondary and also university context, so with adult learners. So those 4 key principles, the first one is that students learn more effectively when they can draw from their entire repertoire and funds of knowledge. Funds of knowledge, it comes from Gonzalez and al. And when they are active participants in their own learning. So this is, I think, the most important first key principle, that it's very important that students would be able to draw from the entire repertoire. So both linguistic, so both on the side of languages, but also the kind of knowledge that they can have brought from home, or they can have built somewhere else than the classroom itself. The second key principle is that participation is achieved when concepts and procedures are introduced through an investigative approach, and they are connected to students' prior knowledge in meaningful ways. So we see that we come back to the prior knowledge that we talked in number 1, but here we insist on participation and the idea that the learners become engaged in their learning through an investigative approach. The third principle is that bilingualism or plurilingualism is a tool, but it is most especially an asset for knowledge construction. So plurilingualism is an asset for learning. And then plurilingual interaction, so speaking through different languages or thinking through different languages or bridging different languages, creates a favorable framework and brings in new tools for the construction and problematization of knowledge. Then let's move on to the 5 key elements that is behind PASTEL in the classroom. So the first element is that we need a challenging problem or question. Why? Because we want to help learners understand the purpose of what they are learning in a way that makes sense to them and adds relevance to the content and skills they are learning. So first element, a challenging problem or question. The second element, again, we come back to this idea of inquiry. So a sustained inquiry. So it's not only what we are doing in the classroom, it's not only for just one activity, but it's developing a mind frame with the learners that they always get into this posture where they are going to inquire around their world, about their world. So engage learners' interest in meaningful activities in and outside the classroom, so that they are going to be able to transfer what they are learning in the classroom, outside the classroom, and vice versa. Then the third element is sharing authentic learning. So learners' work is meaningful and important because their ideas are important for the community and the world. So once again, it's reaching out the doors of the classroom. And the fourth element, learners' voice and choice. So it's important as well that learners can take ownership of their learning and they can adapt to their unique circumstances and experiences. So the fifth element is reflection. So all of this is going to be important, but you also need to reflect about how you've learned, what have you learned, how did you do it, and why are you doing it? So the reflection to clarify learners' own understanding and growth is particularly important as well. So about cross-cutting concepts and learning objects. So we are going to spend a little time about those two ideas, key ideas. What do we call cross-cutting concepts, and what are learning objects, and why are they important for us? So cross-cutting concepts are concepts that bridge disciplinary core boundaries, having explanatory value to help learners connect knowledge from various disciplines into a coherent and scientifically based view of the world, and to make connections between these overarching concepts, real-world contexts, and core ideas across disciplines. So it's really the idea that there are concepts that that can cut across disciplines. And we add to that the idea that this can be done in multiple languages. And in fact, this is this plurilingual lens on the CLIL pedagogies, the CLIL content and languages integrated learning, using this STEAM approach, this pastel approach, because we put the plurilingualism within this equation, that is going to give the movement to the dynamics of this learning. So concepts that bridge disciplinary core boundaries. So now learning objects. What are learning objects? They reinforce the idea of the concept itself, and they reinforce core ideas that connect to specific concepts. And I'm going to give you some illustration right after. So the idea is to understand how concepts and disciplinary knowledge connect to a real world problem or situation. And this is through this means that we are going to cultivate creativity and contextualize learning. So looking at objects as learning activities, learning objects. So let's see where it comes from. It comes from what we call material culture and working with artifacts. So what meanings do objects carry from different perspectives and viewpoints? So material culture refers to the corporeal, tangible objects that are created, used, kept, and left behind by people. So originally, it's a term that was used by archaeologists, that is used by archaeologists and other anthropologists. And for us, what we take from that in our educational process is to focus on the meaning of the objects. So how we use them, how we treat them, what they say about us. And as you will see, some objects reflect family history, status, gender, national or local, and or group personal identities. So the way we are going to see it, we are using objects as learning ways to understand or to reflect about our family, our status, what is our identity, whether it's personal, whether it's national ideologies, for example, or local identities. Let's take an example. An ink pen, because I'm a French person, an ink pen is very important to me. When I was in Japan, I realized that it is important to a lot of people as well. But here in Canada, people do not use ink pens. So I have ink pens and I find it very difficult to find ink. I usually have to order it online or order it especially for myself because nobody uses an ink pen. So in fact, it looks like it's an easy tool. I mean, it's just something to write, but it's way more than that. It's got culture, it's got very important ideas with it. So objects carry culture with them. They are symbols of social identity that may persist through multiple generations. You carry an object is important to you because it comes from your grandfather or it comes from your grandmother. And they can also be learning, teaching tools. And they are traces that have established narrative associated with them. Like, I was very surprised when I was in Japan that I had to get a stamp, and that a stamp was the most important thing to sign official documents, because in my culture in France or in Canada, I had never experienced that before. So we see they seem to be very normal objects, like everyday objects, but they carry a lot of meaning, cultural meaning, and they construct our identity. So contextualizing learning and understanding multiple perspectives is very important when we work through plurilingual lens, because we need to learn to adopt somebody else's perspective. And so we need to develop that awareness and bridging and braiding narratives together. And that's a picture I took when I was in Japan, and I showed it to my students in Japan and then back here in Canada. And everybody laughed very, very much because we had completely different understandings of what that might mean. And when I saw that, when I was taking a hike through Kyoto last spring, I saw this beautiful stone all wrapped up on this path. And I could not interpret it at all. And I thought, oh, well, it must have some philosophical meaning, maybe Zen meaning, or I don't know. And I thought maybe it means that when you have a stone on your way, it comes with a silver lining. It might be, it looks like an obstacle, but in fact, it might be a present from the sky or something, you know. And so I was interpreting it with my own culture and also the expressions, the metaphors, the idiomatic expressions we have in our own worlds. And we say avoir un caillou dans sa chaussure, to have a stone in your shoe means that there is something that prevents you from walking. So this is what I was meaning. My students in Japan said to me, well, it only means that you can't go this way, it's closed, and then the packaging is only to carry the stone very easily. So it was much more pragmatic than I had thought. But that's an example of a learning object that is going to start a conversation. So the success of many of our daily interactions depends on our ability to make sense of someone else's point of view. And so it's not very easy to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who has a different cultural background or speaks different languages, right? So how can we take someone else's cultural perspective? It doesn't come just like that. You need to learn, you need to be flexible, you need to learn those skills. And I chose those two pictures that I thought were interesting. The first one is from a documentary of Papoos from Papua New Guinea in north of Australia that were visiting Paris. And so it's their exposure and the exposure of Parisian people to them in the subway in Paris, and how they are going to start conversations to explain what they are doing here. So they were taking the view, they were documenting what they were seeing in Paris to go back to their world. And so that's an example of trying to bridge cultures. And the other picture I took in Kyoto, it's downtown Kyoto. And Kyoto is in the center of the world. But when I am in France, the center of the world is France, okay? So once again, the center of the world is usually where you come from. And so it's just looking at a map can also be very surprising. Because for me, for example, when I was in France, when I lived in France, I was brought up in France, the other side of the world for me was Vancouver, because France was in the middle and Vancouver was at the tip of the world. But from Kyoto, Vancouver is right here. So, well, right here. So it's not at all the tip of the world. It's completely different, the way you're going to construct your relationship to world and to cultures. So it's important to be able to reflect. So reflection is key to learn from a contact experience. The contact experience is not enough. You can learn a lot from a contact experience, but if you don't have the tools to reflect as well about it and to be able to relate to it, if it's too far away from your own experience, if you can't see anything of yourself in the experience, then it's going to be very difficult to interpret the events from multiple perspectives. It's going to be very difficult to try to take the perspective of somebody else. And when you do that in multiple languages, it can help you do that decentering movement that is going to help learning from the contact experience. And that's an example of this need to contextualize learning and support awareness and perspective taking. So that's an illustration that we have just experienced between my students at university. They are in a PhD program right now. And what they have to do for their assessment, they have to think about critical issues through their documenting linguistic landscapes in the neighborhoods. And that's a mural that was taken by one of my students, that PhD student, who is a specialist in history. And so she was interested in images and murals rather than written words. And so, but it's still part of the linguistic landscape because it's there, it's on the walls. So André took that picture, André Thibault, and then because she thought it was very Japanese, we shared that picture with Mayo, OYAMA, and Daniel Pearce because I was working with them and they wanted to share that, and they were going to give a talk with my students. And so my students wanted to share that picture with them to say, okay, so this is a representation of Japan in downtown Vancouver near the Japanese neighborhood. And it was very interesting because their interpretation of that mural was that it didn't look that Japanese to them. And so they gave it to several different people, and I just gave one example here because it's kind of interesting and it's funny. And then I shared that with my students back. And so it was quite interesting, and I'll let you have a look at what the president of the game enterprise in Japan said about the picture. I'll let you look at it. So the people have octopus-like tentacles, which is creepy. Nonetheless, you get an optimistic impression from this painting. Maybe it's because the situation looks like a tea party. I don't know what kind of intention the creators had in mind, of course. A mural is something that people who live near it see every day. And the meaning will change according to the person's state of mind and their life stages. And that's very insightful, right? And so that's an example of how we can contextualize learning. And I'll show you at the very end of the talk how we are starting to do similar work with Japanese classes just currently. So using the linguistic landscape, so this is kind of a learning object. It can be taken as a learning object. Is a pedagogical tool that allows for a multimodal, multisensory learning experience and text-to-world connections. And it enables greater awareness, cross-cultural awareness, and creative analysis around social language use, symbols, metaphors, etc. And again, here we can see three key factors that are at play: the engagement with local practices, the researcher agency, and what I mean by researcher here is not only us as researchers or as scholars, but learners in an investigative posture, they become researchers, and the physical immersion within the intersection between theory and lived practice. So what I hear very often when I speak about those things is people say to me, well, yes, this is plurilingual education is very interesting and it's valid mostly in multilingual context. It's been developed in multilingual context, it's valid in multilingual context. But when we teach only one language, or if we are in a context where that is not very multilingual, multicultural, it's not that important, it's not that easy to do. And I just wanted to show you that this is not the case. And so now we are moving on to doing pastel in Japan. And I'm going to show you some very quickly. So I'm very sorry because it's just a glimpse on the richness of what I have been seeing in the schools here. And I apologize that it's going to be just so quick and so not as beautiful as we can see in the classrooms. But this is an action research, a collaborative action research that we have been starting, that had been going on, and I've been lucky to join with a couple of amazing teachers, Kanai Rizawa and Yuki Kitano, and I'm going to share some of the practice of Yuki Kitano sensei in just a minute. And we already have 2 articles that are published, one in French and one in English. In about 2 weeks, the one in English is going to be online, and they are both online freely. So if you look for them, you could be able to read them if you are interested. So one is about language biographies and how to use language biographies of the teachers and of the learners as a way to reflect about our trajectories and how we are going to connect that to learning. And the second one is more about plurilingual education and multi-perspectivity in learning, and about what I'm going to talk right now. So around one particular practice with the classroom of Yuki Sensei. So the idea when we did that work was to capture innovative pedagogical strategies that engage learners in navigating and braiding languages and semiotic resources to displace perspectives. So the whole idea again is to try to displace perspectives, which includes coordinating beliefs. If you are going to displace perspectives, you need to look at your own belief, and you need to look at the other's beliefs, and you need to try to find some kind of mediation between them and try to find some bridging. So it's going to help develop an awareness of the other one, other people, other perspectives. And also to resituate the teaching of English as a world language in a more complex and multifaceted way. And so the way we work with the teachers in the classrooms, we do audio and video recordings, or they do audio and video recordings of their classroom interactions. We use visual documentation, researchers' field notes, the teachers and the learners' reflective journaling, and also, of course, the learners' productions. So just a glimpse. So the project targeted multiple classes and grades of learners working together, and the interactive activities were offered during English and other subject classes conducted in Japanese, as well as bilingual culinary workshops. And the aim was to encourage children to actively work with, reflect upon, and produce knowledge in multiple disciplines and from multiple sources and cultural viewpoints. So this is a visual to represent how we've been working. So from the idea of multiple understandings and multi-situated perspectives. So again, integrating disciplinary core ideas, cross-cutting concepts, and real-world practices. And so as you can see, each aspect of a unit can relate to different elements of the curriculum, as well as life stories, natural sciences, art, cultural knowledge, language abilities. And it provides a connective structure using languages, stories, and imagination. So it's both an experiential and investigative learning with the idea that it's going to it's going to support transferable skills in multiple disciplinary contexts. So you see in the middle, I put literacy. So here you've got the pastel ideas, so plurilingualism. So everything that has to do with language stories, where do I live, language biographies, linguistic landscapes, everything about social networks. And we see here kids working with linguistic landscapes. Understanding conceptual knowledge through art, cooking, dance, theater, here it's cooking. Experiential learning and collaboration to learn about social sciences, technologies. And so it has connections to beliefs and prior knowledge and experience. And it's also intergenerational and intercontextual learning. And the whole idea is to work with language teachers and disciplinary teachers on socio-historical understandings of new concepts. So languages and cultural meanings. So first of all, I think the first important thing is to create a multilingual environment in the classroom. And now we are in Yuki-sensei's classroom with a class in the spring last year. Well, this year for you, I think, still the same year, I think. And you have some examples, and we see Daniel here. We have some examples of the ways that Yuki-sensei is having a multilingual environment in a classroom. So with maps and with the calendar in different languages, every month is different languages, and all kinds of languages represented, multilingual books, artifacts, etc. So here we are going to look at the science of chocolate, and so how the teachers collaborated to develop multilingual and multicultural pedagogical scenarios for science learning, science of chocolate, and so how they've been co-planning interactive activities in environmental and social sciences, and developing those cross-curricular topics using technology, a multi-sensory learning approach, so all that has to do with do, touch, see, listen, speak, and through multiple languages. And so the activities targeted a wide breadth and scope of learning through games, experiments, interacting with objects like cooking instruments, scales to see how much flour you needed, how much sugar and everything, to provoke complex cognition and focused attention. And the kids also used clipboards, iPads to translate, record ideas and observations. So the whole aims was to give learners opportunities to develop science literacy in and outside the classroom. And it also encourages them to actively work with, reflect upon, or produce different languages they know or that are present in their environment. So it also focuses their attention on the languages that are there in their environment. So later they could see that there was Chinese, there was also French, Spanish, etc., and of course Japanese. And all of this is going to be helpful to construct knowledge. So this conceptualization of science chocolate through pastel, and you see here, we see another way of representing through a visual what the kids are doing. So asking questions, defining a problem, developing and using multilingual and multimodal literacies, planning and carrying out investigations in multiple languages, analyzing and interpretation of data from different perspectives. And they are going to do all this. They need to use mathematics, computational thinking, construct explanations, design solution, and engage in argument from evidence. So the whole activities help them to obtain, assess, and share information. So a lot is going on, right? So those are examples of pedagogical documentation and inquiry, and the children as researchers and through art here. So the linguistic landscape linked to the characterizations of here the alphabet through a map, through other kind of art. So if you need more explanations, I will leave Yuki Sensei and Mayo and Daniel explain. And if we come back to our key principles that we talked about at the very beginning of this talk, you see here an example of how students can learn more effectively when they can draw from their entire repertoires and fonts of knowledge, and they become active participants in their own learning. And here you have an example where obviously there is the linguistic landscape and the ordinary landscape of the child represented. So all of this is going to be linked to things that are normal, ordinary for the children, like understanding local transportation and other writing systems. So here you see Yuki Sensei engaging both from working with art and drawing a bridge with the alphabetical systems to learn English or French or Spanish, etc. But also using the fact that now the multilingual landscape of Japan is more and more multilingual. There's more and more use of English, but there's also the plurilingual nature of the Japanese writing system itself that is leaning itself to support those bridges. So you see here an example of integrating plurilingual language awareness, language learning, literacy, and art. And here I think it's the name of a train station near where the children are living. And another key principle that we expressed earlier was the idea that participation is achieved when concepts and procedures are introduced through an investigative approach and are connected to students' prior knowledge in meaningful ways. And of course, every child eats chocolate, but do they know how to make chocolate? Do they know where it comes from? Do they know the child labor that is how children are used in some countries to produce the cacao beans, to gather the cacao beans, and how it's going to come to our plates. And so here you see it's learning from a book is going to be interesting, it's going to be important, but learning through experience is even more efficient because the kids are doing it themselves. They see the work that is that it means to just do the chocolate from the cacao beans, and they have to work on their literacy skills. They have to use recipes. They use the recipes in different languages. They use the recipes in English. They use Google Translate. They use their iPads, they use their phones to translate. They work in groups to collaborate to translate those recipes into Japanese. And so here we see that navigation through languages to make sense of what they are learning. And we see here an example of how plurilingualism can be a tool and can also be an asset for knowledge construction. So learning with a plurilingual stance, here are some of the children's reflections from Yuki Sensei's class with translation from Daniel Pearce. Thank you so much. So some example, some children said, I was surprised to learn chocolate is made from cacao beans. I learned that even now there are children who are working. I felt chocolate taste butter now, because they thought the chocolate was very, very amer. I can't find the word, bitter, yeah. So when we made the chocolate, it had a strong smell of bitter chocolate. After researching, I learned that Ghana is a country that produces a lot of cacao, and that in some places in the world, there are children who aren't able to study. And I learned that child labor exists. I felt that it was really tough for children in Ghana to make the sweet chocolate that is being sold. Through making chocolate, I learned that the chocolate I often eat is that hard to make. It was very difficult to make the chocolate. We did participate in that culinary workshop. It was very difficult. I was shocked to learn that we, who don't make chocolate, eat it. But the small children who make the cacao don't get to eat it. I learned that many cacao farmers are children working as child labor. And here you see how a key principle, number 4, plurilingual interaction and reflection, creates a favorable framework and brings in new tools for the construction and problematization of knowledge. We can see that here. And we see how the reflection is rich and sophisticated, and how it connects to social sciences. And in fact, what we can see here is that those 5 elements that we discussed earlier as well, they're all here as well. You see, finding answers to a challenging question, which was our first element, sustained inquiry as second element, sharing authentic learning, third element, learner's voice, fourth element, and reflection, fifth element, they're all there. And here, another example of what the children are saying. I think it's amazing. So that's about the translation using Google Translate. I think it's amazing, but there were some mistakes. There were some things that it could not translate properly. I wasn't able to read some characters. We have to think about how we can use it. Won't interpreters lose their jobs? If we use camera input, we don't know the meaning of the individual words. And so here we see that there's not only learning that is cross-disciplinary, but there's also linguistic learning, right? That is going to be important both for Japanese and for English and for other languages as well. So a few words of conclusion. Here, I'm hoping that I've shown the importance of collaborative projects to develop plurilingual, intercultural awareness and transferable skills, and to show how those pastel approaches are anchored in inquiry-based STEAM teaching. So STEAM, again, sciences, technologies, engineering, art, and mathematics, but plurilingual, most especially plurilingual, CLIL, content or knowledge and language integrated learning projects. And so those pastel approaches can support projects that can target multiple classes working together, but they can target multiple age groups, and they can be valid, like we have illustrated them through elementary activities, but we can experiment them with universities and secondary schools as well. So adult learners, older learners, or younger learners. So here children's learning was contextualized through multimodal teaching, a collaborative inquiry process, aesthetic and gustative elements of the science of chocolate, technology, and the learner's full language repertoires to develop more complex multidisciplinary understandings. And so this asset-oriented perspective on education is absolutely key to support shifts in learners' identities, in their abilities to develop plurilingual and intercultural awareness conducive to critical thinking around social issues, such as social inequalities and human rights and civic engagement. And now, where are we going with all this? This is a new project, and Moore and Azeyama is showing a project by Koichi Azeyama, who is a PhD student of mine, who's finishing his PhD now, yesterday, exactly. So, and who was doing the same kind of work in Tokyo, not in Kyoto or Nara, like we've been doing, but similar work, working with the local linguistic landscape. And so as a way to contextualize experiential learning. So here again, through a collaborative inquiry process, drawing on learners' local knowledge, their imagination, the aesthetic, sensory, and gustative experience of knowledge. Technology, the use of iPads, of apps such as Google Translate, and the students' full language repertoires to develop more complex intercultural and multidisciplinary understandings. And you see Mayo and Daniel and myself working on local linguistic landscapes in the classroom in Japan very recently. So they are Zoom meetings that we have every Monday nights for me, Tuesday mornings for them, working on the classroom observations that have been recorded for us by teachers themselves. So here, this is where we are going next now with those projects, working on the local linguistic landscapes and collecting data with children as social inquirers. And a lot of you are going to recognize that science in Nara, which is absolutely tremendous. And if we had time, we would look at some videos. And as you can see, they are in Japanese, using some English at some points. And here we've got, thanks to the work of Dan, we've got the translation. So it's also easy to use as examples in English. And that's very interesting because I took that picture, the same picture, years ago at another occasion. I was in Kyoto and I visited Nara. And of course, those little QR codes did not exist at the time, but now they are used to translate in many more languages than the ones that are present on this signpost. So why working like this for learners? Because they learn more effectively when they can draw from their entire repertoires and are active participants in their own learning. And we see we are getting back to those key principles that we developed earlier. And for teachers to develop resources, collaborate with their peers in various languages locally, so with schools, parents, communities, but it also helps them develop an identity as researchers and become part of global networks. Like those teachers, they are now collaborating between themselves, so at the level of Japan, but they are also in conferences like ours, that are going to connect them with the entire world, not just Japan or Europe, but also North America and Asia more generally. So a plurilingual lens in teaching and learning can open the space to explore what diverse learners believe and how they talk about STEAM-related content and lived experiences in different social environments and cultural spheres. And it encourages multi-perspectivity, so this ability to adapt different perspectives around knowledge building and reflexivity, the ability to distance oneself from experience and critically analyze its meaning. So all of this is crucial in developing plurilingual and intercultural awareness. And again, I would like to thank my wonderful colleagues, Mayo, OYAMA, Daniel, Pearce, and of course, the wonderful teacher who had us in her class, Yuki Kitano Sensei, and a few references. And I thank you all very, very much. And I'll try to get out of the screen, and I'm back with everyone. Thank you very much, and sorry that I lost. Thank you.
You actually finished 10 minutes early.
Yes, good. See, I can do it. I can do it. I went a bit quickly because I didn't know how much I lost in the in losing my PowerPoint, I wondered how much it took me to come back. Sorry.
Absolutely perfect, and thank you for the amazing presentation.
Well, there's a lot more to say. Like I said, I mean, the practice is so rich, and of course, you and Mayo, and of course the teacher Yuki Kitano Sensei, who's with us. I can see her. Hi, Yuki. Of course, you will be the best to speak about it. And I just wanted to give an overall a picture of an illustration of what is possible, what we are doing, and how we are merging the three threads, and how it's going to support plurilingual education, and why it is important, even in a context like Japan, that we don't necessarily think of as a plurilingual context right away. Why it is important to work with this, and why it is important to develop multiple perspectivity, what we've called multiple perspectivity or multi-perspectivity, and why it is so important to develop reflectivity as well, because the context experience is not enough. You need to work on it, and the embodied experience, learning experience, the collaboration with language teachers and disciplinary teachers is key. And I know that a lot of you here are also more working with adult learners in universities, but you are both English teachers or French teachers, but sometimes you also teach content. You also teach social issues or sciences or something through the use of English or through the use of French as a foreign language. And so this connection is there as well. And the linguistic landscape, I showed this example because we are working like that. When I was in Japan, that's what I used with my students in my class at Kyoto University. And this is what I'm using now with my class as well in Vancouver. So they are adult learners, they are in master degrees, they are undergraduate, they are in PhDs. And so it's, I just wanted to show that the scope is not limited to elementary or just secondary or just university, but we can work like that across contexts, and it's going to be very powerful for the learners. And now I can have your questions.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. I'll come to Kyoto Sensei in just a moment, but thank you for your added comments at the end there. I think it's quite revealing in the sense that looking at some of the content that the students are dealing with, these young learners, at first glance, it might seem like it would be easier to approach these with much older learners, university students or perhaps high school students. And it's really quite incredible the level of content that the younger learners are able to engage with. So thank you very much for showing. じゃあ、清田先生、そして討論の方お願いできますでしょうか。
Okay, so I see there are two questions already. So regarding the topic chocolate, do learners discuss the children labor?
Danielle, I'm going to stop you there for just a second. We will come to those questions, but we'll start with Kyoto Sensei and her prepared questions.
はい、こんにちは。ダニエル・モア先生、大変興味深いお話をありがとうございました。先生のお話を伺って、感想と質問を述べさせていただきます。
Danielle, thank you for the presentation, and Kyoto Sensei will give her reflections and a question or two on your presentation.
まず感想ですけれども、チョコレートプロジェクトの中で、機械翻訳の結果について子どもたちがすごいとは思うけど間違えているところがあると述べているところにまず目を見張りました。
First of all, during the chocolate project, the translation machine and the students' reflections on that, Kyoto Sensei was drawn to the comment that, the children thought it was amazing, but there were some mistakes in the content. So.
というのも、ここでは子どもたちが、 自分の母語である日本語をメタ的に捉えているということがわかります。
And she sort of saw that as a bit of evidence of the children becoming able to take into their account their own mother tongue, Japanese, in kind of a metalinguistic way.
Yes.
さらに、テクノロジーの限界を指摘するのにとどまらずに、間違えているところについてより良い表現を探しているという点に感心しました。このプロジェクトは子どもの第一言語、日本語ですね、の向上にも寄与しているんだということが分かりました。
Okay. And she was also impressed by the fact that children weren't just pointing out flaws in the machine translation, but also that they were searching for better or more accurate expressions. And it sort of showed how this sort of activity can contribute to their mother tongue learning as well, or their first language.
もう一つの感想です。それはチョコレートを作っている子はチョコレートを食べないということへの子どもたちの気づきについてです。
Her second point was the children's noticing that the children in Ghana who produce the chocolate aren't able to actually enjoy the chocolate as they do.
このような気づきは、例えば、ガーナの児童労働の映像を見たり、本を読んだりすることでも獲得できるかもしれません。
And, you know, this is a type of noticing or type of learning that the children could achieve by just reading about it or perhaps, you know, watching videos on the problem. However.
けれども、映像を見て分かったというのと違うのは、自分たちで苦労してチョコレートを作ったからこそ、その経験を通じてガーナの子どもたちの現実に身をもって迫っているんだと思いました。
The fact that the children actually engaged in making chocolate themselves and, you know, the effort and the struggle they had in that process and that experience,
Yes.
Through that experience, the realities of the Ghanaian children became a much closer, perhaps more personal thing for the children.
チョコレートプロジェクトが物の見方を変えるというご指摘、深く納得しました。
And so Kyoto Sensei's last comment there is that in terms of changing perspectives of the children, or developing that change in perspectives, she feels it was, how do I say, not in English. She really felt that through the presentation that you gave today.
ありがとう。
さて、その上で、一つ教えてください。このようなチョコレートプロジェクトを行うにあたって、学校の先生方は、教員同士、先生たちの共同というのをどのように作り上げたんでしょうか。つまり、このプロジェクトを私もやってみたいと思ったとき、英語の先生、家庭科の先生、あるいは他の先生たちとどのように一緒に共同していけばよいのか、その手がかりを教えていただければと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Okay, thank you, Kyoto Sensei. So Kyoto Sensei's question there was, for projects such as this chocolate project, how was this collaboration between the teachers of different disciplines developed? So in other words, for teachers who are looking at this project or listening to this presentation and thinking, you know, I would like to engage in a project like this. So English teachers, home economics teachers, other subject teachers, how should they go about building this collaboration? Is there any hints that you can give us there? And that's Kyoto Sensei's question for you.
So can I respond now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So first of all, arigatou gozaimasu, Professor Kyoto. Thank you so much for your remarks and your questions. So yes, I completely agree. You pointed out the metalinguistic awareness and the fact that working this way not only supports English but also supports Japanese, and the need to be precise with the language is going to feed both ways. So I think that was very important. And you used the word in the translation in English was noticing. And I think that's a key word, noticing. We are raising their awareness and we are encouraging them to notice. And that's in the noticing that the learning, the appropriation is done. And then the changing perspectives, you are right. I think it's through the experience, the struggle, the personal struggle, that it took so much time to ground the cacao beans, and it was disgusting to start with. We have a picture, we have a little video of a kid when they started trying the product that they cooked, the cocoa beans, and they realized how bitter it is. They're just going like this. And it was just an amazing learning experience. At that point, the learning experience was totally amazing. And of course, they could have learned it through watching videos, and they did. They could have learned it through looking at books and manuals, school manuals, and they did. But it becomes real and it becomes personal when it's embodied. And that was the culinary experience. That is when they are struggling themselves and they have their personal experience. This is when it's truly changing their perspectives, I think. I think at the beginning, they just start, okay, child labor, that's very sad. Okay, they don't eat the chocolate. Ooh. Well, do they even like chocolate themselves? Maybe not. It just remains an intellectual problem, and it is learning, but it remains. It's not something that is part of their lives. It's somewhere far away. It's Ghana. We've never been there. We'll probably never go. It's very far. But then they have that experience, and then all of a sudden it becomes their own experience. They are working hard to make it, and they want to make it good. They want to make it well, and they're using English and Japanese to do that. They are navigating languages. They are using iPads. They are using phones. They are using Google Translate and everything. But they are working, and they are collaborating together, and they are sharing experiences, and they are sharing knowledge, and then the problem, the issue becomes real for them. So I think, yes, this embodied experience and this reflection around the embodied experience makes the entire difference. And then your question about how teachers build those cooperations, then I'm just going to say a few words, but I think Yuki Sensei is the best person to answer, as well as Danièle and Mayo. But just from my experience of working with networks of teachers around different parts of the world, like Danièle said at the beginning, I work with French teachers scattered around North America. So they work in the French system, they teach in French, but they are either in Canada or the United States, in the French schools, so usually bilingual, because they have to learn English as well, and they're often coming from different backgrounds. But for those collaborations, we are using a network of teachers. So it's through the network, the associations of teachers that are already in place. And we also need to work with the school principals. So the teachers who are interested in those projects, they need first to reach out to the principal, the school principal. And they have to enroll the school principal into wanting the school to work like this, or thinking that it's a good way to work. So you need to have the right arguments to show why this is important. And sharing those arguments, sharing this knowledge, sharing those resources, showing that other people are doing it and the results that they are having as a showcase, I think is very important to convince first the principals then the parents need to think it's a good idea, and your colleagues, because to do that by yourself is very difficult and not very stimulating. What is stimulating is to be able to work with the language teachers, the other language teachers, to work with the disciplinary teachers, and to have that collaboration within the school, and to have the collaboration possibly with universities as well, because they can give the support to develop resources. So we never start from scratch. We always start from what the teachers are already doing, and we expand from there. We find ideas, we see what they're interested in, what they want to do, and then we think together. So it's like a think tank, and we have like mediators. Like, for example, I can't meet with teachers very easily from Canada now. I could go and visit the schools, but not now anymore. But I visit them through the recordings that are being made. And sitting with Mayo and Daniel every week, looking at the recordings and discussing them. So they translate, we discuss the meaning and everything. And then they go back to Yuki Sensei, they go back to Kana Sensei and to other teachers, and they continue to enrich their resources and their methodologies and how they work. And so this is why it's action research, because they are the researchers of their own practice, the teachers are, right? And so we could not work without them. And I think we complement each other with different skills and different practice. But I think to see how it works at the level of the school and the level of the school with the university, the local university, Yuki Sensei, if she wants to talk, would be the best to respond, I think.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
じゃあ、ゆき先生、ぜひどうやって共同するかについてのですね、現場からの気づき等々ありましたら、ぜひお願いいたします。
ダニエル先生、ありがとうございました。Thank you, Daniel.
ありがとう。
まず、共同ができたのは私が小学校教師だからっていうことはかなり大きいと思います。
Maybe Dan has to translate. 翻訳させてしてもらいますね。Dan, can you translate?
So Yuki Sensei said probably one of the big parts of this collaboration was the fact that she is, of course, an elementary school teacher.
私は、小学校の教師なので、1年生から6年生までの全部の教科を教えています。
So she's teaching all subjects and has taught all subjects from first grade through sixth grade.
なので、いろんな教科のことを知っていますが、それすべての専門家ではありません。
So she's quite aware of the content of all of these subjects, but not necessarily a specialist in each individual subject herself.
つまり苦手なところもあるので、得意なところを持っている先生と共同しなければ仕事にならないんです。
So there are some subjects it's a bit difficult for me to believe that she doesn't feel the most confident in, and so it's a matter of necessity for Yuki Sensei to collaborate with teachers who are strong in those subjects.
例えば、クラスが3クラスあるとしたら、3クラス大体同じことを教えなければならないのですが、自分一人で、授業研究していては間に合わないことが多いので、他のあと2クラスの先生とどういうふうにしてるって話し合うのはかなり頻繁にしている。それが日常です。
So for instance, if there are 3 classes, they have to teach roughly or cover roughly the same content. And so if they're doing sort of reflection or a research on their own practice themselves, there just simply isn't enough time to cover it all. And so interacting with other teachers, sharing what's going on is something out of necessity and something they do very often.
そしてそれとともに、校内だけではどうしようもないことがとても多いので、他の学校の先生、例えば今日ここに入ってらっしゃる安倍氏の先生 のお話を聞いたりとか、一緒に相談したりとか、今回のチョコレートプロジェクトについても安倍篠先生から教えてもらったり、それから、今回給食プロジェクトというのを、大山先生、ダニエル・ピアス先生と一緒にやってるんですが、他の学校の先生とのコラボレーションもとても力強いものだなというふうに思っています。
And so there are some things that they can't achieve within their own school themselves, and so collaboration with other schools and with outsiders is also absolutely necessary. It's important. So she mentioned one of our guests today, Abe Shino Sensei, who's here, who actually, I believe, started the chocolate project herself, and so collaboration between Yuki Sensei and Shino Sensei there was one of the key things. I might have forgotten something you said, but this collaboration with other schools and people outside the school is also a really key element and very encouraging, she says as well. And you mentioned the Kyoto project. And so, for instance, right now, Oyama-san and myself are assisting Yuki Sensei in a project called the Kyoto project, in which each month they introduce foods from various countries around the world, and they have people from those countries give explanations about the food, the history and the culture in Japanese, and also display various objects and artifacts from that country for the children to interact with.
And also speak in different languages.
And also speaking different languages.
Because you spoke in Maori in the presentation of New Zealand.
Yes, I did. And
because this is one of the questions we have from the floor as well about the other languages.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Maybe we should move on to the questions raised in the chat room.
Okay.
Thank you. Arigato.
ありがとう、ゆき先生、ありがとうございました。
Yes, arigato gozaimasu. I think one of the questions, so the child labor, we already responded to this one. I think the question from Taiko Nasu. Nicholas Wilson, hi Nicholas, I think you are the one who wrote about the mural, right? My students absolutely loved it, but I didn't have enough room on the slide to have both examples. So thank you so much. So yes, it's true that the policies is not really there, but I think what we've been doing, we've shown that it's possible to work like that within the framework that Japan has, and now with the push for English being taught at all levels since 2020, I think it's an amazing opportunity, and also this is where we don't want to miss it, because it would be easy to just fall and say, okay, we just teach English. But that's where we can easily, well, not easily, but we can push and have those other languages included as well. And this is where the linguistic landscape, the work on the linguistic landscape is interesting, because the linguistic landscape makes that link with other languages other than English. And also the Olympic Games is just a wonderful opportunity, because all the new signage, and so even in terms of history, for example, if you're interested in history, you can see the signage before people were engaging with the preparation of the Olympic Games, and now the new signage that's got all those new languages and that are going to be different depending on where people are situated. There's also a new awareness of indigenous languages in Japan, like Ainu in Hokkaido. So there are all kinds of ways that you can build in and make those bridges. And it links to the question that we have after regarding the advantage of the multimodal Japanese writing system in promoting multilingual education. And the article we are publishing, and several other articles that we are preparing to publish are trying to go into that question of the plurilingual nature of the Japanese writing system itself, lending itself to develop those bridges across languages. Like the example I showed with alphabetical writing script. So of course it works for English, but it works for French, it works for Spanish, for German, for whatever system use an alphabetical writing system. But the Chinese sinograms within Japanese can also bridge, you probably didn't have time to see, but some of the things that the kids were saying when they were looking at the linguistic landscape and looking at that Nara, the sign in Nara about the deer, they were saying that they could recognize some of the Chinese because they could recognize the sinograms, right? They could recognize some Chinese characters, and they could see that maybe they're a bit different, maybe they are not in the same order and everything. But then it's going to trigger their language awareness, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we can see is that they are making bridges with not only Chinese, but maybe Korean, maybe Vietnamese, maybe other languages. And in some of the linguistic landscape that Mayo has been taking with a child, with her own children, we see like the presence of Russian in certain parts of Japan. And so it's quite interesting as well for the children to kind of reflect about why we have Russian in some parts of Japan, but we don't have Russian in Kyoto, for example, or in Nara. So why? And the status of indigenous languages, like we can see signs in Ainu, in Hokkaido, but not elsewhere, for example. Why? So they can reflect, you see there's geography involved, there's history involved, there are all kinds of language policies. You can draw links with a huge number of different things. So maybe Mayo and Daniel, you want to add something about the linguistic system and what we've done? Right. About even the fact that thinking in different languages for concepts has been helping us, for example, as scholars. Definitely. You want to say something about that, Mayo?
あと3分なので。
3分。そうですね。今おっしゃっていただく、例えば一つの例ですけど、複言語主義という非常に重要な概念がありますけれども、それももう日本語で複言語主義と訳されて定着しているので、それ以上考えない。日本で複言語主義と言われれば複言語主義だな、それ以上考えないわけなんですけども、やっぱり複数の言語で仕事していると、どうしてもそれが他の言語でどういう意味を持つのかということを考えなくてはいけないわけですね。でそうすると、複というプルリという接頭辞が一体どういう含意を持っているのかで他の言語に落とされたときにどういう意味を持つようになるのかということをいろいろな言語で、巡って考えていくと日本語でもですね複という、翻訳でただ満足しているだけではなくて、これはもし、ね、漢語ではなくて和語に置き換えて考えたらどうなるのだろうとかそういうことを考えていくとやっぱり非常に新しい見方ができるようになっていくわけですね。もうすでに馴染んでいる概念に対しても新しい見方で考えることができるようになって、それは私たちのやっぱり理解を深めるように非常に思われるわけです。これが一つの例です。短く読みました。
Thank you, Mayo. So actually, this ties perfectly into a last very brief question for Danielle from myself. But Mayo was just explaining here how the work in between different languages and really coming to terms with the concepts and thinking about them between languages really localizes thought in that sense. And that actually brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, a follow-up from your first answer here. When you talked about, from KIYOTA Sensei's question, when you were discussing some of the students' learning and that you're picking up of the word noticing, and this noticing leads to appropriation. You use the word appropriation, and just, you know, to be very specific with terms and working within different languages. That in English, that can be quite a taboo word these days with cultural appropriation and that sort of thing. So perhaps you could clarify that.
Sorry, that's a very interesting one because, of course, I was thinking of appropriation in French in my head. So not appropriation in the English way. That at this time means taking away the culture of somebody else and taking it for ourselves was for our own profit. The idea of profit is very important, because otherwise, I mean, when we talk about plurilinguaging, translanguaging, meshing, navigating, the profit is learning. It's not making money profit, right? Maybe at the end someday, but not now. No, I was thinking about appropriation in the sense of like really experiencing learning and learning. So everything that has to do with learning. So appropriation. In French, we make the distinction. We try to use appropriation to go away from acquisition. So the idea that it's lifelong learning and all of this. So this is what I meant. What I meant was that when there is noticing, there is a sequence. The sequence where we notice triggers the possibility to learn. So it's like lights going on, like highlights, you know, like and we think, okay, we need to work on this. We did not understand this word. And sometimes when we do it in our language, it's not very easy to realize we don't understand what it means, because we think we understand because it's our language, and we miss the fine layers. But if we have to do it in another language, and then we have to understand really what it means, and so this noticing and this peaufinage, I don't know how to say that in English, like going very smooth, very like going in details, fine-grained, then it's linked to noticing, right? And so this is why also experiencing contact and everything is not enough. You need a reflection, because the reflection helps the noticing. Okay, so we see that we are always going back to those key ideas from different angles.
Thank you very much, Danielle. And so with that last question, we've just gone a couple of minutes over the time. So to finish up this session, I want to say, first of all, thank you very much to everyone who assisted in this. KIYOTA Sensei, thank you very much for your questions and comments. Also, Yuki Sensei, thank you very much for joining us on the spot. Abe Shino Sensei, thank you for starting up the chocolate project. Mayo, for your comments, questions, and help with everything going on. And of course, the staff for this morning, Danielle, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to listen to what you have to say. And I think we've taken away a lot again from it today.
Well, I have learned so much from you all, and it's just such an honor and a pleasure to work with my Japanese colleagues. And thank you so much for the teachers who've been working with us, because they make our lives just amazing. And it's a pleasure and an honor to collaborate with everybody. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to participate today, because it's a real pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you. Arigato gozaimasu. Arigato. Merci beaucoup. Merci.